So the key theme today is how might future innovations in technologies, markets, services, products, demands and education transform Australian agribusiness, and how can the sector be innovation ready? So we've got some really interesting speakers throughout the day to really challenge ourselves around that. And it's going to be a bit here and now, but there's also going to be a fair bit of out in the future. And our first speaker is going to be really, really exciting about that. So we're looking forward to that. So I'm going to welcome Susan Bauer, who's the Manager of Agribusiness with Westpac, and Westpac are major sponsors here. And she's going to introduce the first speaker. So could you please welcome Susan Bauer.
Thanks, Mark, and good morning, everyone. It's nice to see so many fresh faces here this morning. We're really excited, Westpac Agri is really excited about this forum, GrowAg, but not only that, to get 100 of some of the best and brightest minds in Australian agriculture in the room together as one group to think, to challenge you, and to get you to move your thinking in the future direction is really exciting for us. So I'm not sure how many people are aware, but in 2017, on the 8th of April 2017, Westpac will turn 200 years old. So as Australia's first bank and Australia's first company, we're really, really proud of that history. But more so what we're looking at is when we're entering into our third century, we're actually picturing ourselves as a third century startup. So from that I mean we need to be thinking differently, we need to be acting differently, and we need to be really agile and fitting with the environment, because if we're not agile and moving with the environment, we can't be agile enough to support all of you and your industries to get you where we want you to go. There's so much potential in Australian ag. You guys in this room, you're all the leaders, you're the future leaders, and I know you hear that a lot, but this is reality. You're on the doorstep of being the ones that are going to lead our industry into the future. So this morning, I'm really excited to be able to sponsor this panel session, and we've got an amazing speaker here for you today. We could have stood up here and we could have, did the 101 to banking and talked to you about cash flow and budgets and, being ready and business planning, but we're actually taking it to the next level. So we've got an amazing speaker here, Xavier Rizos. So Westpac has this, it's called The Garage, and it's an in-house incubator where we actually get people and groups of people, both internally and externally, to come in and we start to challenge their thinking around problems. So they come in and they spend a day with Xavier or his team, and they actually work through what does this look like. If there's a problem or an opportunity that they've found or they're looking at, they come in and they absolutely go crazy and think tank for a day or a couple of hours or whatever to try and pull out a solution out of that. So this morning we've got Xavier along here. Xavier is amazing. I'm not going to take anything away from him. He's going to actually tell you his background, but Xavier is here to challenge your thinking. And this morning he's really, really going to stretch your mind beyond where you thought it would go today. So please, make sure you think outside the square, think innovatively, think differently. And if you can do that and keep a really open mind, I think you're going to get a lot out of this session. So again, we're really proud to be here with you guys. You're the future. We recognise that, and we're doing everything that we can to support you. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Xavier.
Is it working? Can you hear me? Okay, so thank you very much, but I prefer to come as the underdog, and it's no pressure. So this presentation, I called it "The Next Steve Jobs is Going to Be a Farmer." And I can already imagine that half of you, if not more, are rolling their eyes, thinking, oh my God, again, another guy who is going to talk to us about innovation and is in love with his latest iPhone and the Uber app and all that stuff. Well, it's actually completely the opposite. So I wanted to put this as a provocation, and you'll get my point when we get to the conclusion of this presentation. So the first thing, actually, you can hear my accent. I was not born here. I was born in France, but I've now become an Australian citizen. I've been here for 14 years. And I'm going to be a bit French on you. During the revolution of all the cultural movements of the 1960s, the French philosophers had a say. They say, when you talk to me, where are you speaking from? So in order to understand the points that people are trying to make, you need to understand where they're speaking from. So I'm going to answer that question up front. The first thing is, where am I speaking from professionally? Susan just mentioned. I work in a place called The Garage. It's in Sydney. It's a very messy space full of whiteboards and post-it notes. And we get people together to sit for 4 to 6 weeks at a time to work on ideas. And it's not an innovation lab with fancy computers, fancy technology. Our technology is pen, papers, markers, and whiteboards. And we're trying to actually test and spend a lot of time on the problem that people want to solve in order to build prototype that they can showcase. And the difference that you might look at this and think, well, I've seen a room with whiteboards before, what's the point? For people who've been working in a very bureaucratic manner in an organization where you send an email on the Monday, you might get a response on the Tuesday, you might get a meeting set up on the Friday or maybe the next week, everything is very slow and full of red tape. And that place is about being innovative in new ways of working, where you put people in a room together, you work together, and you solve a problem very quickly. So that's the first point about where I'm speaking from. The second point, which I mentioned, is I was born in France, but in particular in Burgundy. So this is where I was born, and it's a place where we make a lot of wine, as you might know. And whilst I do not come from a family of farmers, I grew up in this environment. My friends, when I was young, were all winemakers. My first girlfriend was the daughter of a winemaker, so if I was not here, probably I'd be doing this right now. And so I think I have a little bit of empathy and appreciation for the job that you're doing. So I wanted to start with a bit of a provocation. I don't know if you've seen that movie. It's the movie with Matt Damon that was out on the screens a few months ago. It's called The Martian. And I find it quite absolutely amazing that you've got this scenario where a guy is being sent on planet Mars. He's got all the NASA technology, he's got all the fancy uranium, plutonium, nuclear reactors to actually explore the edge of the solar system. And at some point, he gets stranded on the planet. Now, despite the billion-dollar technology supplied by NASA, what happens when he gets stuck? The first thing he's got to feed himself. Otherwise, he's going to die. And the first thing he does is that he looks into the boxes. He's got mostly processed food because these are the rations that are being given by NASA. But he finds potatoes, and he actually finds some poo from the toilets that they had. And he engineers some soil with fertilizers, and he grows his own food. Now, if that is not a metaphor to say that AG Agri is at the center of what the foundation of innovation, I don't know what is. So this is why I wanted to actually put this provocation out there, that the next chief job is going to be a farmer. And we already had a conversation this morning. I know some people will say, no, that's not true. It's not going to happen. So maybe I should rephrase the question and say, maybe the next chief job should be a farmer. And what I mean by that is, I've been working in this kind of environment, with whiteboards and fancy designers and hipsters from the city. They want to come and talk to you about innovation. And every time, it's the same story. Let's design a new app to catch a cab. So I'm asking you, does human civilization need one more app to catch a cab on George Street in Sydney when we've got 9 billion people to feed in this world? We've got people all over the world that need sanitation, that need food and fiber to actually sustain their living. This is why I started to actually go into this direction. So the first thing, and I want to come with a lot of humility and being extremely humble and candid, I'm not a futurist. What we do in those spaces and with this incubation is not about predicting the future. And anyone who comes in front of you to actually say, I'm the expert and I work for whatever think tank, and I know exactly what the silver bullet is going to do or be, I don't think they're right. Because if they were right, they would probably be sitting on an island somewhere having the billion-dollar idea and already resting. And that is this paradigm here. People accumulate data. They actually bet their life on the probability that's going to happen, and they think this is going to be the silver bullet. Where I'm coming from, instead of a world of probability that I cannot predict, I prefer to speak from a position of possibilities. It's like when you take insurance. Are you going to be hit by a car? Are you going to be sick from the flu? Are you going to have a problem, cut yourself on your hand? I don't know, nobody knows. But what you try to do is build a portfolio of possibilities so that basically you envisage as many as possibilities as you can, and you've got to be creative and innovative in doing this. And that's what the innovation is about. However, saying that, all the research, and I've been researching and I've been working in that field for a while, all the research, when you interview people in your businesses, in your companies, in your investment funds, if you go outside of your sector, the feedback is consistent and systematically the same. Objects in the mirror are always closer than they appear, which means that the future always comes faster. Or an American guy, I think, who goes onto those tech talks and YouTube videos says, the future is already there, it's just not evenly distributed. Okay, so in some places it's there. So I get you that. If you go to leading edge, breaking ground science in CERN in Switzerland, where they are colliding particles together, we're talking about like some bleeding edge research. But in the field of business, usually the patterns and the signs, the weak signals, as we call them, are already there. And the tipping point is when they start to go mainstream. So this is really what it is about. So what I've done, instead of giving you my opinions, which I think are worth what's basically the paper they are printed on, I've gone back to the World Economic Forum, I've gone back to CSIRO, I've looked at research overseas, I looked at what some people who invest, you know, the big investment banks who actually where they see the future, and I've tried to compile, and what I'm giving you now is just a slice of it. It's not exhaustive, it's not everything, but it's just a slice of it. And it's going to cover several lengths. Now, if I were a little bit facetious, since we've just finished the Olympic Games, I would say that those lenses that are fairly consistent with all the research I've done are a bit of a right to win that game. So starting with the first question, and I'm probably going to go fast on this one because I think you've covered a lot of those global insights, is where, mining and dining in a wealthier and angrier world. So there is no doubt about that. We're starting with the 9 billion question is, how many Earths does it take to support humanity? You know, what is the reason why we're here in this room today is basically to grow food and fiber for the people who live on this planet. That's just the foundation point that we want to make. And I'm sure you would have seen this kind of statistics. We know that today there are 1.6 planets that are needed to actually sustain ourselves. If you put it another way, and if you think of your business, your family, your farm, and you think in terms of budget, it means that this year, on the 8th of August, we've exhausted our budget. And from the 8th of August onward till the 31st of December, we're running on, we're depleting the kitty. And that is going to drive some insights. So every time I put a point like this on the screen, the question we need to ask ourselves is, so what? Okay, so thank you very much for telling me that, but what does it mean? Well, I think what it means is that we've got a dual dynamics where on one hand, we've got people in this world who are trying to catch up with our standards of living. And on the other hand, we've got people who are actually already there. And for them, it's all about trying to do it in a more sustainable manner without burning the kitty. And when you think differently about your practices and your businesses, you need to have this granularity of insights to actually think that there are probably different markets to address and to actually tailor your needs. You're not going to talk to a Parisian guy who wants to get some import from Australia or some people from Japan who want to import some of your goods and services. In the same way, you're going to talk to a country that's trying to develop and catching up with those economies. Now, when we go to the next level of abstraction, so there's this big planet, we need to feed it, got it. What does it mean? Who is behind that? Well, it's people. That's the whole point. Now, the key driver behind all the demographics and the dynamics that we are seeing in this world is about migration. So for years, for centuries, we've actually lived in a world where people were moving around. And if I look around us in this room, we probably all come in our families and our ancestries from different places. And we're not, our parents were probably not born here. And it used to be a geographic migration. So that was a fairly simple equation. Now, the biggest insights that we are facing today is that for the first time in history, humanity is facing the biggest migration wave we've ever seen. The problem is not the same wave as the pictures you would have seen of people arriving as migrants to Australia, or these people standing by the Statue of Liberty in the US, migrating to a new territory. It is a rural to urban migration. We're having, on the global scale, people leaving the country congregating to cities. And the problem is it comes with a double whammy. The first dynamic is that we used to have farmers who were sustaining themselves with their own food. They're not there and producing that food anymore in rural areas. But on top of it, what happens is that they congregate to those places and there is no land and they're not growing their own food. So we're depleting the country and we're having people congregating in places where they can't even sustain themselves. So we've got to put the double effort to actually feed this population. The other key insight with that is very often when we talk about this demographic explosion, we always talk about the big cities like Beijing or Delhi. And in fact, when you actually look at the data, it's actually the small cities that are growing the most in most global places. I've got a colleague who is from China at the moment in Sydney, and she was telling me that she grew up in a small city by the border of Vietnam in China. It used to be a 800,000 people city when she was born some 25 years ago. Now there are 7 million people in that city. I don't know if you imagine being born in a place where you could basically walk around or at least drive around in 20 minutes. And now you're in a place where when you drive your car, an hour later, you still haven't gone out of the city. It's mind-blowing. And those people need to be sustained. Now, the one thing that, and speaking of China, I think the dragon in the room, and just addressing at the global scale, and just picked one question, is very often when we open the newspapers, we talk about the boom of China, and we ask ourselves, is it an anomaly? Am I betting on the wrong horse? Is it going to blow up in my face? So I just wanted to share with you one piece of data. A guy, some years ago, an economist in the US, wanted to calculate the share of the world GDP since year one. So we're talking about more than 2,000 years ago. And he's actually extrapolated, calculating the land mass and the population of, that was on the planet at this time, that roughly China used to have 1/3 of the world GDP. And when you think about it, it's fairly understandable. 1/3 of the land mass, 1/3 of the population in an economy that was mostly agricultural makes sense. Now, the problem is during the colonization of the West and Europe, that share of world GDP collapsed. And now what is happening is that China is regaining that market share. So my contention today is that instead of seeing the boom of China and the boom of Asia as an anomaly that might actually stop, I'm saying, and according to those economists, that what is happening is that China and Asia are basically regaining the natural market share that they should have never abandoned throughout history. Okay? And they are probably going to stabilize back where they were when China was this big empire that was dominating Asia. Now, and I'm just going to finish this on the global perspective. This is one of my favorite slides, and it's actually a story. It's actually trying to bring home that agri is really the foundation of everything. So I don't know if you remember, a few years ago in the Middle East, there was something called the Arab Spring. So we had revolutions popping up in Tunisia, in Egypt, and all over the Middle East. And I don't know if you remember those, the headlines at the time in the media. They were saying Twitter and Facebook, social media in general, have caused the Arab Spring. And why was that? Because in Iran and across all those countries, people were organizing meetings and riots through social media. And these were exactly the type of articles that were written by people who were in love with the technology and the latest iPhone and the latest iPad, and wanted to make us believe that technology was driving everything. The thing is, when you actually look at this curve, which is the food index, the food prices around the world, what we see here is that it's actually, the number of red dots is actually the number of riots that erupted at that time. We actually see that it's actually the food prices and the shortage of food and affordable food that actually pushed those people to actually rebel against those their governments, okay? So this is really showing us at which point this sector and is like, to me, I compare it to the tectonic plates. They are the ones who move the continents. This is the foundation. It's the whole difference between macroeconomic circumstances and marketing and branding, basically, which creates illusion. But this is really setting the equation in which we are dealing with. So after we've basically made the point that we live in a world that is extremely busy and extremely hungry, the second one is, there is no doubt about this, I'm not going to harp on it, you've all watched TV and opened the newspapers, people are grumpy, okay? All around the world, Trump in the US, Brexit in Europe, we've got crisis, whatever your school of thoughts and your views of the world, there is one thing we can't deny, is people are fairly grumpy at the moment. The second one is, again, whatever our thoughts about the reasons, what we should be doing about it, there is one thing we can't deny: the ecosystem is being stretched, and we probably need to do something about it. And the consequences, so the so what is for this room. What are the consequences? Well, this is a picture from Paris. No, you're not dreaming. That big thing here that you see is the Eiffel Tower. So the French tried to express themselves in the way they know how to, which is a big riot on the streets. So they drove their tractors to Paris, and they just made sure that the government could hear them. So what are the consequences to our sector? And I wanted to drill a little bit into that. This is it. And I think when I look at this curve, this is really showing at which point we need to think really deeply about the consequences of the pressure points. This is basically a curve that puts together on the same graph CPI, which is inflation, and the volatility of the food prices. The consequences of that, and I looked into more details which I didn't put on the screen, is I have friends, for example, I'm just going to tell a story because it's more personal. I've got friends who are farmers in France. There are years where they can buy a car cash without getting a credit. You just walk into the dealership and they buy the car. And other years where they finish the year with 500 euros, so basically 500 Australian dollars, like an entire family finishing with a net of $500 after a year of working. I do not know any other industry. I cannot even fathom it for myself, having such volatility of income and being able to actually always being stretched and having to wreck your brain to budget and forecast permanently. Now, the so what with that is, what is super important is when you think about innovation, there are multiple dimensions to innovation. And usually in the garage, we use a very simple framework that fits in 3 letters, so you can probably write them down. It's D, V, and F. So D is for desirable, desire. Do people want this new thing? Do people want this new iPhone? Do people want this new iPad or this new way of catching a cab? The F is the feasibility. So people want it, right? Can we build it? Okay, is it feasible? So the technology, and all of you around this room probably have a technology solution in their mind. But the third one is V for viability. Is it commercially viable? Do I want to go to the moon? Yes. Can we build a rocket? Yes. How much is it going to cost? $1 billion. Well, I can't go. I don't have that money. So we need to find, and when you actually think of innovation, again, going back to the metaphor of the Steve Jobs, the biggest innovation that we all remember from Steve Jobs is that he invented the iMac, he invented the iPad, he put the iPod on the tables, and this is fantastic, and he will be remembered for that. But I would probably contend, without talking like a ruthless financier, which I'm not, the biggest innovation that is made, him and Bill Gates, is that they've actually provided those products at a price that people can afford. Their biggest innovation is that they've democratized something. Speaking about the future already being there, they democratized something that has already been there for years in big rooms, in data centers at the CIA, the FBI, with those massive supercomputers, but you and I could not afford. And when they rock up on the market and they say, you can buy my phone for $99, now we're talking. So the analogy for me, or the metaphor, or the thought-provoking, if you like, is when I see that curve, I'm absolutely sure that if we get together and actually between the producers, the distributors, the end consumers, you can actually work out different ways of engineering the financial. It's probably going to be a blend of forward contracts. Maybe it's something different. I don't know. If I had the answer, I probably again wouldn't be here in this room. But that is probably something to think really hard about. And I'm going to keep on going on this conversation. And the point I want to bring home is, it's got to happen if we think collectively as an ecosystem. Now, after that kind of, yes, the system is being stretched, we are talking about people. So to me, this picture is worth 1,000 words. This is our consumers. It encapsulates everything. It's about the food, it's about the freshness, it's about the quality, it's about the distribution and the scale and the volume. It's about the fact that it's a new generation. And it's about the fact, frankly, that I think people are becoming more and more conscious. We were discussing this yesterday, by the day. And what I would contend is that in this age of globalization that I just mentioned, which has brought tremendous progress, okay? So don't get me wrong, I'm not here to start to whinge about the way the world is going and, you know, we're all living extremely good lives. But there's always two sides to a story. And I think the story for globalization and the way we're doing things now is it probably has created a tyranny of distance that has become institutionalized. So the tyranny of distance, you might know, is a book that was actually written about Australia, being such a country far away from the rest of the world. And the tyranny of distance to me, in my mind, is when you create a massive distance between the product you want to sell and the end consumer. So this is a metaphor, if you like, or an illustration of the supply chain. And there are obviously names on there. Probably some of you are working for the distributors. My point is, okay, we're having bottleneck into a supply chain that goes from the seeds to the final product. Now, no matter how well-intentioned we are, and I'm not, you know, everybody is starting with the place of wanting to do the best job, and they've got probably their heart in the right place. The problem is when you have structurally embedded bottlenecks, it just can't be good. Even from, I'll give you an example. I work for a bank. We recently launched a business. Instead of launching it as our own brand, we invested in a startup so that they could actually disrupt ourselves, right? Because we believe that when you start to have too few players in a market, you strangle the competition, and in the end, it can't be good. I wouldn't put all my eggs in the same basket for my own family. I wouldn't do it for my own lives. I think we shouldn't do that for the sector as a whole. So, and the consequences can be dire. So I just picked one example from France. I'll go very quickly. You don't have to read that picture, but a few years ago, they found out that there was horse meat in what was supposed to be beef lasagnas. When they inquired about it, they actually found a web, an intricate web of brokers and dealers and horses from Romania that were slaughtered and ended up as Italian lasagnas in French plates. I grew up on those dishes, by the way. And you can imagine the uproar in the country. And the thing is, the fixes are not far from straightforward. This is, again, it's not just to discuss the health rating system. At the end of the day, it's just one thing amongst others. But it's a metaphor to say, when we try to apply fixes after the fact, they don't work perfectly, and we can spend hours discussing that thing, you know, the way it's being rated. Is it equivalent? When you have a Mars bar rated 4 star, is it equivalent to a carrot stick? We know it's not. Anyway. So, and then there is that. And I just want to take a couple of seconds to talk about this and confess my naivety and my ignorance. So a couple of days ago, the merger between Monsanto and Bayer was announced. So I saw an article in the Wall Street Journal. So we're talking about the Wall Street Journal. I'm not talking about some hippie journal distributed under the cover wants to have a go. This is the Wall Street Journal, so they're fairly considerate from an economic perspective. And I thought, the merger between Monsanto and Bayer is actually saying that the industry is going well. Some people are going to be very happy about this, so this is a fairly good sign. And when I read this column, I found out that their conclusion is exactly the opposite. Their contention is that the reason Monsanto accepted to be bought by Bayer is that Monsanto is smelling and feeling that the end of the party is coming. And they are actually agreeing for the takeover because they are fearful that they might actually see their profits going down. And their argument is that the price of the biotech that Monsanto is selling since the 1980s has been multiplied by 4. That a lot of farmers who are using their technology are starting to struggle to make money. That one of the consequences and collateral damages of using those biotechs is that some of the pests that used to justify using those pesticides have actually disappeared from the fields. And you can see this in any type of insurance industry. When you start to believe, and I'll use the example of the self-driving car, and we ask ourselves very often this question in technology, it's not about 100% of the technology. It's if I start to have enough radars and collision detectors on my car, would I still want to pay an insurance with AME or GIO to actually insure my car? I'm still going to pay the CTP because if I have a collision with somebody, I need to be insured and it's low. But I don't care. I don't want to buy it. So basically what's happening is that Monsanto is actually finding itself in a situation where they see farmers wanting to rebalance, and this is exactly what we mean about sustainability, is actually rebalance the solutions that we are putting together. So, and if you don't believe me, just think what happened in the world of finance in 2008 when I talk about distance. We had created so much distance between the homeowners and the loans we are doing and the big banks that in the end, people were losing line of sight of what is it that they were selling. You've all seen the movies, you've all read the articles. And in the end, this big tower of risk basically went kaboom. So I'm told I've got to actually speed up, so I'm probably going to have two minutes over the 5. So using the next lens is our tech DNA. My contention, and this is bringing back home again that you are the true innovators, and you are the ones underpinning all that. I'm a bit of a history buff. I've read a lot of history books about the history of industrial revolutions. Every single time in history, there has been a major technology industrial revolution. It's always come or being enabled by an agri-revolution. When the Industrial Revolution happened, you had farmers leaving the fields and all moving to the cities and the big manufacturer, the new plants that had been created in Manchester and in the UK. What had to happen is that agriculture had to supply surpluses for these people who were working in big cities. Because those people, in the same way I mentioned earlier, were not farmers anymore, so they couldn't produce their own food, so we had to generate surpluses to actually feed them. A few centuries later, after World War II, there was a big boom of reconstruction around the world. So some of that revolution has been called the Green Revolution, and it came with pluses and minuses. We were in a complete quest for yield. And now, today, we are in this phase of globalization. It's another revolution, and it's more of an information revolution, a data revolution. So the thing is, it's not a smooth ride. What we found is that since 2008, the actual trade of goods and services and finance has started to plateau, whilst data, the data that is exchanged online, that is exchanged on the internet, and when I talk about data, I want to go beyond just the computering exchange of files, it's the knowledge, is exploding. So what does it mean for AG? What it means is the conversation we had a bit this morning is we're going to be smarter about the way, and you know, I'm not here to show how to suck an egg. You know much better than I do about those fields. I just want to put those things as illustration. But basically it means that the way to become smarter is we're going to actually start using the knowledge we have about the climate. We're going to start to extrapolate historical data. We're going to be very precise, with some of us are actually doing that, to actually making sure that the way we farm is closing the gap of uncertainty and risks that is surrounding the fact that we are dealing with natural circumstances and we can't control the climate. So we can't control the climate, we can't control the weather, sorry. I should rephrase that one. We can probably control the climate if we are a bit more smart, but we can't control the weather on a daily basis, but we can control how we actually deal with those variations. And we can push the envelope. You know, look at New York City. I mean, this is a big city, and they're looking at urban farming. Now, again, I need to actually be precise about what I'm saying. I'm not advocating that tomorrow morning, all the hipsters living in big cities are going to grow their own tomatoes on their rooftop. What I'm saying is that a city is a big amalgamation of people that needs to be planned. And out of that planning, new innovations can come up. So I'll give you an example I was thinking about this morning when I was having my breakfast. You know, there is a company in cities in Australia, in Sydney at least. It's called GoGet. You can get a car for 1 hour. You know, they are parked everywhere. You have a card, you tap your card, you drive your car, you bring it back to the pod, and you basically rent the car for $9 an hour. And now, more and more, we're seeing blocks being built in Sydney with GoGet car parks. So when you buy a unit, instead of buying your own car, you get a share of that shared car. Think 5 seconds. What if tomorrow when we buy a unit in a big city, you get a share of food supply from a selected market or a selected farm? What if somebody came up with a business model where they partner with government and councils and they say, you want to grow this new precinct? Fine. We also need to actually supply food and goods to those people. We're here, we've got this business model. We can actually provide and lock you in. It brings certainty of income for you because it will be part of the financing of this new precinct. And it will supply traceable, sustainable food that you guys will be producing. So this is the type of metaphor. And if we think this is completely ludicrous, this is a competition that was organized in Paris a few years ago, where the council asked people to actually seriously think in a completely extrapolated, imaginative way what the city would look like. Obviously, you're sitting there thinking, Paris will never look like that. Well, think again. In 1918, at the end of World War I, that's what Paris was looking like. Okay, circumstances were particularly special, and I don't wish the wrath of World War I to come on us again, but that means that it was done before, it can be done again. And we can push the envelope further. We talk about proteins. Some people are actually talking about eating insects, or at least manufacturing food about that. I don't find it particularly appealing, but when you actually look at the data, you actually find that in some cultures in the world, this is what's happening. So I'm going to land, and I think I probably have 5 more minutes to conclude. We are having now to the point where what is our common wealth? And I literally purposefully splitted the two words. It's our wealth. What is our common proposition for ourselves and for the. So the first thing I wanted to do again in the kind of feel-good thing is, if we think of modern Australia, so acknowledging that there was a culture and there was a continent there before, but just focusing on what is modern Australia today, you can probably give yourself a big pat on the back and a big round of applause, because this is how it all started. Your ancestors started with 5 rabbits, 25 ducks, and 7 cows or 7 cattle. And look at where you are today. Each one of you produces enough food to feed 600 people. You're feeding 150 people each day at home and 450 people overseas. This is massive. And the other prejudice I busted when I did my own research, I was on, I don't want to buy tomatoes who are coming from Chile in the middle of winter and strawberries that are coming from Greenland. Well, actually, in Australia, you supply nearly 93% of the food. So the food I eat every day comes from this country. This is a massive success. And when you actually look at the projection, we talk about Australia, we used to talk a lot about industries, manufacturing, we talk about mining all the time. Well, this is Treasury looking at the share of agriculture in the GDP or in the national economy. They predict that it's going to be multiplied by 2 by 2050. This is something that comes from Deloitte, and you had the guy, I think, coming, I heard earlier. This is a big graph, like consulting companies love to produce them because it looks pretty. And usually when it's on the top right corner, it's good. It's, it's strong, and it's got lots of GDP involved. So this is agri. And I wanted to put it another way and pause for 5 seconds. It means that agri, as a sector, is going to grow more than 4% annually. Now, if you think of it, we live in a world where interest rates are being negatives all over the place. You have interest rates, returns are collapsing. And when we talk about percentage, whether it's the percentage of the system growth of an industry or the return that you get on your term deposit, basically it's all the same. It's how much return can you get from an asset class. That means that in this current environment, you guys are on top of that league, basically. So, however, we need to be realistic about growth. And whilst we hear, and the statistics are very comforting, I also hear people, and this is really something I want to pick up because I really value the thing you said this morning, where we had a quick exchange and conversation is, no, frankly, you're joking. The next chief job will not be a farmer. And we cannot be the football of Asia because look, whilst we are very happy with the way we're going, in terms of volume, this is fairly small. And you just made me think about that is, when we use the Steve Jobs analogy, it's just a metaphor. So we can attach any assumption we want and any prejudice we want about it. We're having today the idea of an Apple, because an Apple company that's got iPhones everywhere. But we just need to remember a few years ago, before Apple went really big with their iPhone, Apple had a very small share of the market. Most of the computers and the softwares were Windows and were coming from Microsoft, right? However, they were iconic enough that by their leadership and the way they saw the world and the way they were designing their products, they were able to influence indirectly all the other players. So this is my contention, is that, and I'm going to conclude on this, and I'm going back to a French word, is if we put the soil at the center of everything, this is our commonwealth. This is the land that you are working on, okay? This is the land that you're working for food and fiber, which is basically saying the way you start to deal with health is the food you eat. You've got to wear the clothes. If you think of that thing as an ecosystem where everything is integrated, and from the farm to fork, I prefer the word from soil to mouth, where you actually have a vision of an industry that needs to work together. And I'm going to actually spend a bit of time. I studied when I was at uni, I studied physics and biology and exchange of flux. I always thought that when you think of an ecosystem or when you think of a system, the boundaries of a system are limited by its physical barriers. So this cup of coffee is an ecosystem. The thing is, the latest research is showing that it's not the gate of the farm that says that your farm is an ecosystem. It's the flux of energy and the way those various cycles are actually in perpetual motion that feed each other, that define an ecosystem. And for me, this metaphor, between the farm, the main crops, the water crops, the fish pond, the chickens, the livestock, the earthworm that are regenerating all that, it's a metaphor for this room where you have various actors that are all working together. And if the loops are actually feeding each other like cogwheels, the whole system is working like clockwork and becomes sustainable. Now, the French have got a way of call that. They call it terroir. And where I grew up in Burgundy, they said the terroir is the combination of the soil, the sun exposure, the inclination of the hill that condition the way the water is being drained for the vines, as well as the nature of the soil. They bend and they say, look at this, it's a good soil and I can grow some vine on this. Well, my contention is this is our unique terroir. And I would actually contend that, and I'm not on drugs, I'm completely sane, that Australia should be having the ambition of becoming the France of the Southern Hemisphere. You have, and again, I'll finish with a story. I've got friends visiting me regularly from overseas, and you know how the French can be really annoying. They are extremely snobbish, they are extremely arrogant, they can be terribly rude, and they particularly think that their food and their wine is the best in the world. I have an absolute jubilation to take those people around in Australia, to make them drink wine and eat our food, and see their face and going, shit, this is really good. This is amazing. My dad, who is the most grumpiest person in the world when it comes to wine, I bring in some bottles of wine from Australia, and I say, so what do you think? And one day he considered, he said, well, you're asking me to compare a Picasso and a Monet. The Monet is the French one, it's the old stuff, it's very mineral, blah, blah, blah. This is the Australian one. It's Picasso, it's great, I love it. And last time I came back, my mom actually called me saying, just make sure you bring some of that stuff because I'm sick and tired of the thing we've got at home. So this terroir, it's everything. It's the annoying Bondi hipster that do your head in, but they're there, we need to feed them. It's the stuff that we actually produce on a mass scale. It's the fact that we've got people ready to put themselves on TV and actually advocate for this sector and this industry. It's also the premium stuff that is very small in volume, if you like, but carries a brand and a value proposition. And obviously, it's the core of this industry that is all working together. And I really believe, and I'll conclude on that because I think I've overreached, this is a unique proposition. I can see in a few years' time elegant, simple proposition all over the world that people will want to actually, buy, trade with, and it's more. It is absolutely more, and I'll put the clicker on the table now to tell Suzanne that I'm really done. It's more than the products. Just to finish with an anecdote, friends of mine who live in Burgundy and now study winemaking in colleges, they're constrained by so many rules in Europe. They can't do too many things because, you've got this appellation, it's all controlled. They come to Australia to actually work with winemakers here who don't have all these European regulations to try and test techniques that they couldn't actually do that. This in itself is something that people are seeking. Voilà. So this is why I was saying that the next chief job, I am absolutely persuaded, should be in this room.
How bloody good was that? A Frenchman and R.M. Williams. That's pretty good. He's all right. Okay, we've only got time. We went way over time. But that was really interesting and we weren't going to stop him. Any quick questions for Xavier? Anybody want to make a statement? Come into the front here, Xavier. Any sort of follow-ups for that? Well, obviously, Xavier's going to be here for the day and tonight too, are you?
So, actually, I'm flying midday, but I'm here this morning.
Well,
we can follow up if you want to. Yeah.
But we need to keep talking to this man. He's very interesting.
And what I was going to say, if you guys actually have ideas and you saw that space I showed you in pictures, let's talk. You can come. My team will be more than willing to actually, give you resources, spend time. I'm very serious. I'm pledging for you today that if some of you, and if you don't want to come to Sydney and you want to set up a garage somewhere else, let's talk about it.
Fantastic. Righto, well, thank you very much. I think we'll keep going, but let's talk to Xavier through the day.